When I was 22, I had built a successful business that I sold for $650,000, and I lost most of it. I'll give you the full story and why I was able to succeed, but first of all, let me give you some context that is really important to understand all of this. After finishing high school in Germany, I spent a year in Australia to travel and work there. Eventually, I met an Australian girl in Sydney, fell in love, met her family, and felt at home until the inevitable happened and my visa expired, so I had to leave. I promised her I would find a way back, but there were no visa options for me unless I build a business that makes money online so I can come back on a tourist visa. But building a business seemed impossible at the time. I was 20 years old, I had no clue about anything, but it was my only option. Because in my mind it was very clear. If I don't make it back to Australia and get a visa, I'll never be happy. And I gave myself 1 year to make it happen, or else my girlfriend might just meet someone else. But the first days back in Germany were just brutal. I missed my girlfriend and I didn't know if I would ever see her again. Immediately got into a fight with my family, left to the nearest city, and I ended up staying with these two girls that I went to school with and just slept on their carpet. First, I had to figure out what business I could actually get into. My first idea came from a course that a buddy had given me access to, where they teach you to basically sell a premium service for $500 to $3,000, cheaply outsource it to third world countries so you can make a profit. And my idea? Book cover designs. And so butterflybookcovers.com was born. And after weeks of going through the course, designing a nice website and creating a fancy logo, I realized this is never going to work. You can't just get cheap designers from India to make a book cover that is worth $1,000 that anyone would pay for, and it would never make enough money for me to actually sustain myself. A few weeks were wasted, and to make things worse, by that time I had moved in with 5 other people into this tiny apartment, and the walls were really thin, and next to me was this really buff guy who always had this girl over, and they were getting it on so loudly. And I was just lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing her moan super loud, just thinking again about how potentially my girlfriend is currently seeing someone else, because when I left, we had agreed to keep the relationship open because we didn't know if we'd ever see each other again, and I was here trying to start this dumb business idea, just feeling like the biggest loser on the planet. But in all this turmoil and uncertainty, there's one thing that kept me going. I started a daily practice of visualizing myself at the end of the year coming out of the airplane, passing the immigration officers and hearing them say, "Welcome to Australia." And my vision became so strong that I would literally go to bed at night and dream about being back in Australia, literally having tears of joy in my dream, and then waking up with actual tears on my face, realizing that I wasn't there yet. But then a weird coincidence happened. I met this guy at a bar who had just started a business, and we became friends instantly. And he told me about this business model where you find products on Amazon that sell really well, and then once you rank on Amazon, they're just going to sell on autopilot and you could work from anywhere doing that. This is exactly what I've been looking for. I went all in. I devoured everything I could find about the topic. I started researching products on Amazon that had a high sales ranking that I could also compete with by making a better product, until I eventually found a niche in the baby category that was promising. But this was not an easy business to start. I would need at least a few €1,000s to buy my first inventory, which I didn't have. I took all the leftover money that I had from working all these odd jobs in Australia, sold a bunch of old video games that I had that were near and dear to my heart, but they had to go, and then even took a job as a bartender at this super shady nightclub. My girlfriend told me that she was able to come to Europe in June so we could travel for a bit. So by then there were 2 products I had found that I had to launch before she was coming so I could actually afford to travel with her and also not miss the opportunity before someone else got in. So I analyzed the competition and brainstormed how I could make these products better than anything that was already available. I would contacted multiple suppliers, went back and forth with them, making really sure that they could customize the product the way I wanted it to be. And I literally drew the product designs in paint so I could somehow communicate to these Chinese suppliers what I really wanted. And then I finally ordered the first few customized samples that already cost me hundreds of dollars. And I'd already seen a couple of more competitors coming into the market, but I took the leap and made the biggest payment of my life at that point, which was a few €1,000s in one single wire transfer, just hoping that I wasn't getting ripped off. And about 2 months later, the shipment for the first product arrived. Even though the packaging looked really cheap, the products were fine and they worked. So I sent them off to Amazon's warehouse, and soon after that, there they were. After months of sleepless nights and hard work, they were ready for sale online. But the real work was only beginning. I asked anyone I could, friends and family, to buy it and write a review for it. And soon after that, organic sales started coming in as well. It seemed like I was doing well enough to travel once my girlfriend comes over soon. But that excitement didn't last very long. The same month that I had launched my products, products, there were 5 other competitors with similar products, and it got really competitive. Some of them even wrote a 1-star review on my product, which just killed the rating, but I still had the second product as a second chance to put myself above the competition. I'd already ordered a few samples for it, but this product cost 6 times as much per unit as the first product, and I was out of money. But to make it work, I found more of my personal belongings that I could sell, kept working as a bartender to save up more money, cut back on the spending, and I wouldn't recommend it. Even borrowed money from my dad, who, as I found out later, also actually didn't have the money. He just thought it was okay to go in debt for a while because he trusted me and thought I would pay him back on time. Oopsie. And I placed the order for the second product, just hoping it will work out. But of course, these weren't enough obstacles yet. See, I was so stressed, all these competitors coming in, my girlfriend coming soon, and just hoping it would all work out. And I was sitting at Starbucks, emailing the suppliers and also texting my girlfriend, when all of a sudden I get this text from her. It was this very sexual meme that was completely out of context. My heart just dropped because I knew that text wasn't for me. In that moment, my throat just tightened. I was struggling to breathe and had to ask her straight up, was that text for me? She had met someone a few months ago who was just a friend at the time, but eventually she developed feelings for him. Now, I knew it was a difficult situation and we were open and all that, but my entire world just crumbled. She was gonna come over in just a few weeks, but I just told her, you know what, just cancel your flight. And I just took my stuff and just walked for hours, just thinking about everything. You know, is there still a reason for me to pursue this goal of making it back to Australia? Was this all for nothing? What am I gonna do now? But after a lot of thinking, I was able to understand her position. I mean, we were both just afraid and terrified of the other person meeting someone else, and we just wanted to keep our options open, both of us. It was not just her. So I decided to let her come, and yeah, I got back to work. Although I was very unproductive because my mind was still racing and it was hard to focus, I was able to launch the second product and it worked well. And the great thing was that when I launched the second product, the sales of the first product increased as well because these products were going hand in hand and people bought them together. So that just shows you how important it is to actually pick a niche and stay within it. And then in June, she arrived at the Frankfurt airport. I took the cheapest long distance bus I could get to pick her up, and we were able to travel on a very small budget to Amsterdam, Austria, and Prague. This was definitely by far the happiest month, and really the only month that I was happy. It was amazing. It's exactly what I needed through it. Yeah. After all this. But eventually it had to end, and we were once again at an airport saying goodbye to each other, not knowing if we would see each other again. But this time I told her, I'm going to make it back by December. Even though with the money that I was making at the time and where things were going, this was definitely not possible. I would have at least needed another year. I ended up stumbling upon this podcast episode, and this guy laid out this journaling exercise that completely changed my trajectory. You take your current goal, multiply it by 10, and then figure out an action plan from there on how to achieve it by asking yourself very strategic questions. I'll make a video on it in more detail at some point. For me, my initial goal was to make 3,000 euros per month in profit by the end of that year. But what if instead my goal would be to make 30,000 euros in profit by the end of the year? This just seemed completely impossible and ridiculous. It was just 6 months away, and how would I just grow it that quickly? But I went through the exercise, and after 20 minutes or so of just brainstorming, I realized this was totally achievable. See, I figured out that there were 3 products that I knew about that would be able to be successful and make enough money to actually reach that goal, but only if I were able to launch these 3 products in the next 3 months. And to do that, I needed more money. But if I was able to sell more of my stuff, like my electric guitars as well and all that other stuff, lowered my product prices to get my investment back quicker, cut more of my spending, and just got more money together, then I could make it work. So there I was with more responsibility and more pressure, still not knowing if this whole thing is going to work out long term. The samples of all 3 products that I was about to launch were great. Everything went according to plan. The last quarter of the year approached, but then things took a turn. It got so competitive that Amazon started tightening the rules. We saw people losing reviews on their products or randomly having their store terminated for minor things that everyone was doing. I had just finally booked a flight to Australia, which was just surreal because it was happening, and recently placed the down payment for the order of all these 3 products, which was just huge. And then I get an email. It was an email from a lawyer with a document attached to it that was accusing me of tens of thousands of euros in damage and threatening me with lawsuits unless I cease and desist. They said the issue was that, okay, to make it short, one of my competitors had hired him to make up some small thing that had to do with these flyers that were inside the packaging of each product. You can pause the video here to know the details. But the gist of it was, he was trying to drain my bank account and get rid of me that way. As a result, I had to take back all my products from the Amazon warehouse, open up the packages of thousands of units myself to take out the flyer and repackage it, and then send it back. So during that time, I wasn't able to sell, wasn't making any money. The suppliers were waiting for my payment, and I was losing my rankings on Amazon while all this competition piled in. And I just thought, now that I'm so close to it, is this where it ends? And after days of unpacking these things, I was able to get it back online, started slowly selling again, and somehow was able to pay these bills and make it back online. And eventually, as I launched the new products, it literally blew up my business. A month later, near the end of the year, I did not reach my goal of making 30,000 euros in profit that month, but I made 22,000 euros in profit. So in December, I packed my bags, and after stopping over in Austin for the first time in my life to attend an event here, I was arriving in Australia. And just seeing it from the airplane from above was just so surreal. To have that be real life and not just my visualization, my imagination, which I had done all this time. But what people don't know is that Australia is arguably stricter than the US when it comes to immigration. I had just left Australia as a backpacker only a year ago, and now I was coming back, which I read online was already very suspicious to them because they think you might end up staying there illegally, because that's actually something people do. And on top of that, I read multiple stories online on forums of these people who told the immigration officers that they were there to visit their girlfriend or boyfriend, and then were rejected because of that. And as I got out of the airplane, walking towards the immigration officers, I was so incredibly nervous. I was trying so hard not to look suspicious, already sweating like crazy, just hoping that please, after all this suffering, please don't let it end here. I had my documents ready, I knew what I was about to say if they asked me any questions, and then it was my turn to come to the counter. So I gave him the passport, he looked at it, asked me a few questions. I was shaking from nervousness, my voice was cracking. And then he looked at me, checked something on his computer, looked at me again and said, "Welcome to Australia." And there I was, exactly where I had envisioned myself to be. And in that moment, when I stepped outside of the airport, it was just a flood of emotions that I could not hold back. A year earlier, I had no idea if this was possible, and here I was, back in Australia, having a successful business, just being a completely different person. I had grown so much, and we were reunited, and I was back in paradise. Were we happily ever after? No. I still need to tell you how I ended up actually selling the business and then losing a lot of the money. When I went to a lawyer to see if I could get any long-term visas, he told me that we're now eligible for a partner visa, which meant that we had to move in, share bank accounts, we had to send them pictures and screenshots of text messages to prove that we had been together for all this time. But it would take 18 to 30 months for them to actually go through the application and make a decision whether I would get the visa or not. And until then, I would only be on a bridging visa. But for now, I was living in Australia, I was living in paradise. This was the first time that I really realized that no matter what goal you achieve, it won't make you happy. In fact, I had no friends, I was extremely lonely, and it was really hard to meet like-minded people that were as young as me and also ambitious. And all of a sudden, the only person that I was really spending time with, my girlfriend, her and I were starting to have fights, which never happened before. I was working by myself all day, my business was a mess, I was constantly running out of stock, the numbers were up and down, and I just hated every single second of it. So I decided that I was going to sell the business. So then I had to turn it into an attractive asset that someone was willing to pay a lot of money for. I started building systems so we never run out of stock again, hired someone for supply chain management, someone for PPC and admin work, and I prepared more products that we would launch so it had more of a future potential, which made it more interesting for investors. The numbers were still very volatile. One month I'd be making 33,000 euros in profit, another one just 18, then down to 12,000 euros, back up to 24,000 euros again. And of course, this is bad for investors. They want something that is stable and trustworthy. And keep in mind, the fear of getting my account shut down was still present all this time because Amazon was just unpredictable. But all I could do was put in the work and hope for the best. When finally someone was interested and we set up our first meeting, a 22-year-old, an international business broker, and 2 investors on a call. At that point, I'd already done a lot to make it really interesting for them, but the offer they gave me was really low, so I had to decline, just hoping that there was going to come a better offer in the future. And by then, the numbers were on a downward trajectory again, and I was just freaking out. Weeks later, another offer came in. I still had the guts to decline, but then their final offer came in and I was satisfied. So on February 6, 2018, I signed a contract to sell my business and all the inventory that was involved for a total of over $650,000. Is this the end of the story? Trust me, I wish. I would only get paid the full amount once the transfer and handover of the business was successful. And if I lost my account or the transfer failed, I was done. And of course, it took them months to set up the company that would end up buying my business, which they were setting up in Malta, a European tax haven, while I was just praying that nothing went wrong. But then they realized Malta is the only country in Europe that can't use Amazon's fulfillment service. So after months had gone by, nothing happened. This was torture. I was so close to finally getting paid out all the money that I had made, which at that point I had just reinvested because I only took out $2,000 a month to pay for my own bills. So they decided to set up the company in Cyprus instead, which is also a tax haven, which would again take months. Meanwhile, the numbers were volatile, the competition was vicious, and I was just on my knees praying that nothing would go wrong. And during this time of stress in my relationship, we ended up having fights every weekend. And I knew that if it kept going like this, the relationship would end. And then I'd have to leave the country again. But Australia felt like my home at that time. I had finally made a lot of friends and I had even practiced my Australian accent because I thought this is going to be my home forever, so I want to fit in. But of course she was worried that I was just staying with her because of the visa. And over 300 days later of having the contract signed to buy my business, the investors company was finally set up. We sent the first inventory to them and they made their first sale, which meant that my payment was due. I was so happy for like 20 minutes. Think the story ends here? Think again. I still have to tell you how I lost the money. My girlfriend and I kept fighting every weekend and we tried to go to counseling to see if that would make things work. But in about 6 months or so, I would finally get my visa, but it just wasn't working. I broke up with her. I had 28 days to leave the country and I had to say goodbye to my friends, her family, which was like my family, and this country that I thought was going to be my home. So after 2 years in Australia, I found myself back where I started, in Germany. Lonely, heartbroken, depressed, and hopeless, but with hundreds of thousands of dollars in my bank account, which would be cut in half by taxes soon. I strongly believe that every obstacle is there to teach us something or become a stepping stone for something much better to come. If I could go back and take away any of the struggles that I went through, I wouldn't take away any of it. I was glad I went through it all. But there's one regret I had throughout all of this. I wish I would have allowed myself to be happier while achieving all of this. I wish I would have focused more on surrounding myself with people that I loved and enjoying the journey with them, which is why I'm so passionate about now building this community here for people that don't fit in because we're crazy ambitious and we want to live a life without regrets. We don't want to end up as lone wolves, which most of us are, but it doesn't have to be that way. And fast forward, although I ended up here in Austin because I later on invested in a new company that I'm starting here, which is where I dumped most of my money into to get an investor visa so I could start this thing. It took me a long time to figure out what I was actually passionate about and what I wanted in my life, which is where I actually ended up wasting most of my money. I talk about this in this video here, so if you're struggling to find your path in life, then go check it out. It'll really help me, so I hope it does the same for you. Thanks for watching and I'll see you there.